Welcome back to Creative Excuses, where we make excuses to use overpowered rings. Sometimes. Today, we're jumping on the bandwagon and talking about that beautiful Oakensoul ring. But I'm not going to go and be negative about it, like all the other videos that you've probably seen about it. I actually think that the ring is fantastic and a great addition to the game. Stick around to find out why, or just flame me in the comments for that sweet algorithm nectar. But please engage with the arguments at least a little bit. Spoiler, I do think the Oakensoul should get a nerf, just not a massive one. So let's jump into it. First things first, let's talk about why the ring is so powerful in the first place. The ring brings a crap ton of damage to almost any build. It gives a bunch of weapon and spell damage alongside 20% increased crit damage and 10% increased damage in general. While none of these buffs are unique, so they can't be stacked in coordinated groups in PvE or PvP, they are still incredibly strong buffs. I don't have the math to back this up, but I suspect this ring brings comparable damage to the Thracian Strangler's mythic gloves that are used in a lot of score runs for solo arenas and other PvE content. Basically, the ring is really, really strong. At the same time, though, it gives you really good defenses with 10% mitigation and your major armor buff with 100% uptime. That's incredibly strong in both PvE and PvP, though it is admittedly stronger in PvP than in PvE. Finally, there's major heroism, which gives incredible utility, letting some classes spam absolutely broken ultimates like corrosive armor on Dragon Knights, or the restoration staff ultimate, or basically any ultimate a ganker is going to use, because the ring makes gankers bonk so hard. But here's the thing. With all of this power, I don't think the power is actually why the ring is so popular. Sure, it's popular among gankers, but it really just makes ganking easier and possible to do more often. It doesn't make ganking better because the sweats already have ways of one-shotting people. This ring just makes it faster to do so. You can do it more often. The ring does break PvP Dragon Knights though, because corrosive armor is an insanely overpowered ultimate. But it's been pointed out that apparently that ultimate is banned in most dueling tournaments anyway, without the ring even as a factor. So that ultimate itself is already overpowered. This just makes it even stronger. Now, the restoration staff ultimate spam is insanely busted, but to be honest, healers in PvP are already busted without the ring. If you've ever had a healer on your team in a battleground and they're good, you're already a god. Basically, we have access to a lot of the power that Oakensoul gives already, just with more effort required. So the power can't really be the reason the ring is so popular. Maybe it's the ease of access, but here are 3 reasons I think the ring is so popular. The first is the one that many PvP content creators aren't super happy about, and that's that it makes PvP quote-unquote easier. It does this in a couple of ways. First, it removes 95% of the need for buff management. Most classes in PvP, and most builds in PvP that equip this ring, don't have any more needed buffs in order to hit their peak performance, so as soon as you start fighting, you can start bopping. There's just not that much setup. You just jump in and start booping snoots. The damage you get also means that you can kill people fairly quickly with a good burst combo. The power the ring gives isn't why this is popular. The pacing is. Combat with the ring becomes faster paced with less downtime because you cast fewer abilities that don't actually have a tangible effect, which are buffs. And most abilities that do have a tangible effect are damaging abilities and heals. The Oakensoul ring on its own changes the flavor of ESO's PvP combat. It goes from being a slow-ish paced, methodical timing of burst windows and buff management to an absolute slugfest. This doesn't mean that you can just slap the ring on any build and win with no skill. A good player that understands how to line up all of their offensive capabilities into a short window will still vastly outperform a noob with Oakensoul on and the best offensive sets in the game. Oakensoul just makes buff management non-existent, which removes one part of the skill ceiling from PvP, but it doesn't remove all of it. There's still a high skill ceiling in knowing how to counter classes or builds, how to line of sight, where to line of sight, how to line up your burst, etc. Buff management was the least interesting part of PvP to begin with, and the ring takes that away. Sure, it makes PvP easier, but it doesn't really make it easy. This is one reason why the ring is popular. Whether the ring is a good or bad thing is going to depend on how much you like the faster paced slugfest. I personally like it. It makes the PvP combat feel more like a MOBA like Smite than an MMO with a million abilities to cast. I think it's a lot of fun. If you watched my Bobo Templar PvP build, that build was designed around the same thing that Oakensoul is doing, but it used 2 bars instead. That's the main difference. The second reason that the ring is popular is well represented in the Reddit comments on Deltia's post about the Oakensoul ring. The ring helps with accessibility. This is an important point, and it's one that's worth parsing out. The ring makes back bars obsolete and removes the need for casting all of your buffs. Awesome. But it doesn't actually lower your actions per minute or your APM while playing by all that much, and here's why. In a given minute of combat, depending on your rotation, you probably bar swap between 6 and 20 times. That's not that much. However, even with Oakensoul, which obviously prevents bar swapping, you still want to be casting an ability once a second and casting a light attack once a second. Those are always optimal no matter what. So realistically, your APM on a 1 bar build that is not a heavy attack build actually only goes down by 6 to 20 bar swaps because you will still be casting the same number of abilities as before. This sounds like it wouldn't actually help with accessibility for those with disabilities or for those like myself with generic hand pain, but it does, just not by lowering APM. Instead, an Oakensoul 1 bar build makes it so that you have fewer different abilities to cast. This is important. It's not that you're casting fewer abilities, it's that you'll be casting your most comfy abilities more often. When you have 6 damage over time skills, 2 buffs, and 1 spammable on your 2 bars, you'll be casting abilities using different buttons quite often. This means you'll be casting abilities that are less comfortable more often. But when you have only 5 abilities and an ultimate, you can't make a damage over time rotation that keeps your hand moving to different keys every key press. You need a spammable. Where does that spammable go? It goes in your most comfortable spot to push, and it's gonna get pressed far more often. Now, there are exceptions to this, of course, like a sorcerer with the new crystal weapon, and then bound armaments, and a spammable, but you obviously don't have to use that setup if you're interested in accessibility. The point is that the ring makes it easier to make comfortable builds to play because you don't have as many abilities to keep up. So you'll be pressing comfy abilities more often, and this is a fantastic thing, and I'm glad it exists. I think there is a third reason why the ring is popular that has not been well represented in videos on the subject. And this is the reason I personally love the ring and hope that when it does get nerfed, it doesn't get nerfed too hard. But even if it does get nerfed too hard, I'm still not worried about it. I think it'll be great. The third reason is that the Oakensoul ring trims the fat from your builds. What do I mean by this? I mean that buff skills are most often, they're just unfun bloat in a build. What happens when you cast a bull or a Betty Netch as a warden? You summon a little pet with a beam, you get 20% more of a stat that will make your damage go up a bit, and you'll get some sustain over the next 25 seconds. Awesome. What actually happens when you cast a Betty or Bull Netch? You summon the pet that doesn't attack anything. The only immediately tangible effect is that you now have a pet. That's it. You now have a pet, and the numbers that you hit go up a little bit. What about when you cast a heal or a damaging ability? Well, as long as the damaging ability isn't delayed damage, the immediate effect is damage, and it feels good to do that. When it's a healing ability, the same thing happens, but you're healing yourself instead of dealing damage. Your health bar fills up. There are immediate and tangible impacts from these kinds of abilities. Buffs often don't have this kind of effect when they're cast. They might give you a bit of extra damage on your other abilities, or they might give you some sustain, but those effects are generally felt over time and not immediately, so they aren't all that fun. The exceptions are when casting a buff makes your build go from feeling terrible to feeling great. Think of a Magicka or Stamina Templar that cast Channeled Focus or Restoring Focus. Those skills give an armor buff, sure, but their bigger effect is the absurd amount of sustain that they provide, while giving you a heal if you follow its rules by standing in the small circle. The buff is almost secondary to the sustain and the heal, because the sustain and the heal make the Templar feel so much better with to hunker down. Oakensoul allows you to trim out those buffs that don't have powerful secondary effects that are worth casting the ability for on their own. When you only have access to 5 abilities and an ultimate, every slot on that bar counts, so you have to strip out everything that is not absolutely necessary for the build to function. Unless you're a Magicka Templar, where you can just cast sweeps all day and ignore the rest of your bar, even without Oakensoul. Of course, you can make builds like this without the Oakensoul ring. Wearing Oakensoul just makes those builds better, and it enforces the 1 bar limit, which I think is fun. So what ends up being so fun about Oakensoul is that you are only casting abilities that give you effects you will feel immediately. It helps reinforce the cause and effect relationship between your abilities and your combat performance, which is fun. Every ability matters. Every ability cast matters. Nothing is filler. It's a fun way to play, and this is why I think the Oakensoul ring is a good thing. I'm fairly confident that even if the ring gets nerfed down to just giving you your major damage buffs, your major crit buffs, major resolve, and major courage to replace the back bar enchantment, it would still be one of the most popular mythics in the game. That being said, the ring is still a bit too strong and needs some nerfs. Here's what I'd like to see. First, the ring is ridiculously strong for gankers. To remove that functionality, make it like Thrashians, where going crouching or going invisible disables the ring's effects for the duration of stealth or invisibility and for 5 seconds afterwards. This won't stop ganking, but it will make ganking a little bit less convenient, which is important. Second, we have to deal with the 2 most problematic buffs, Major Force and Major Heroism. Major Force is the easier buff to deal with here, just drop it down to Minor Force. Still powerful, but it's not insane. That way, if you want Major Force as a solo player in PvP or PvE, you still have to give up an ultimate slot or a 5-piece armor bonus. It doesn't change the ring in group play because almost every group has Major Force when you need it, and it just makes getting Minor Force easier for you. Heroism is a little bit harder to deal with because it's the most exciting buff on the ring. I think if you just straight up removed it, the ring would still be in a great spot, but I don't want it removed because it's cool, and you are still giving up the ability to have an optional ultimate by using the ring. But to be fair, here are 3 different options for dealing with the Major Heroism buff. The first nerf I suggest could be to just remove Major Heroism. Because that is, again, the most exciting buff, I think they should make a mythic item that gives Major Heroism and Minor Heroism 100% uptime and 50% increased ultimate damage at the cost of like 20% regular damage and healing. This would be cool, I think, and would make ultimate bonk builds still possible and really fun. Second, instead of removing Major Heroism, we could just nerf Major Heroism. Right now, every other major and minor buff share a 2-to-1 ratio. The major buff is double the benefit of the minor buff. Major and minor brutality are 20% and 10% respectively. Major brittle is 20% and minor brittle is 10%. Major force is 20% and minor force is 10%. The major recovery buffs are 30%, while the minor recovery buffs are 15%. But Major Heroism is 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds, and Minor Heroism is 1 ultimate every 1.5 seconds. That is a 3-to-1 relationship. So let's nerf Major Heroism down to 2 ultimate every 1.5 seconds. This will take away 40 ultimate per minute from Major Heroism, or the equivalent of an entire Minor Heroism buff. This would mean you still get more ultimates, but it's only 1 extra cheap ultimate per minute at 80 ult per minute, rather than 1 extra medium cost ultimate like a Dawnbreaker as it is now. This seems like a fairly reasonable nerf to me. The third option is the reverse of the second. What if we remove Major Heroism and add Minor Heroism, but then we buff Minor Heroism? Right now, Minor Heroism is only 40 ultimate per minute, which is tiny. That's roughly half of a cheap ultimate per minute, because cheap ultimates generally cost 75. And that's just a minuscule increase when your base regen is already 180 per minute, assuming you keep up your light attacks. Technically, it's a 22% increase, but in actual combat, it just doesn't make much of a difference unless you're min-maxing. So to get that 2-to-1 major to minor ratio, let's buff minor heroism to 60 ultimate per minute by making it give 1 ultimate per second, instead of 1 per 1.5 seconds. This will make minor heroism play better with the decisive trait, but it still won't be super busted. 60 extra ult per minute is significant, and would be a very nice buff to other skills and sets that don't see much use, like Heroic Slash, Heroism Potions, Shulk Exoskeleton, and Champion of the Hist. I think this is my preferred nerf to Oakensoul. So I know these 2 nerfs to Oakensoul are not drastic, just dealing with major force and major heroism. But I think they're sufficient to bring it more in line with other options like Sea Serpent's Coil. But as I said, I think even if the ring just gave you major brutality and sorcery, major prophecy and savagery, major resolve and major courage, it would still be one of the most popular mythics, if not the most popular mythic, because it changes the flavor of ESO's combat, especially in PvP. It makes the game's combat more accessible by enabling more comfortable abilities to be used more often, and it trims the unfun fat from the build and makes every ability and every decision matter more. I know Oakensoul is still controversial, but I'm confident that it is actually a good mythic for the game because of these 3 effects. At the very least though, I am loving Oakensoul and fully plan to keep using it on many of my builds. Alright everyone, that's all I got on Oakensoul other than builds, so go ahead and get subscribed for the upcoming builds with it. Next week I'm planning to put out an Oakensoul Dragon Knight for PvE, and then I have several other builds all planned and ready to go. I just have to write, shoot, and edit the videos. Remember, let me know what your thoughts are on the Oakensoul ring in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next excuse.